Neck-throughs, guitars, they're like a guy that you won't have a beer with you.
I want to hear what's pushing the notes.
Freddie King and B.B. King, Albert King, and let's not forget Burger King.
I don't want to blow my knuckle out.
Stainless steel is the work of the devil.
These go to 11.
From the East Amplification Tone Labs in Baltimore, Maryland, it's the Amps and Axes Show. With your hosts, Jeff the Godfather of Low Wattage Amps Bober and Mick Marcelino.
Well, good day to you, Mr. Bober.
Good day to you, Mr. Marcelino. How are you?
It's a little tricky, but we're doing good.
Life is always a little tricky, my friend.
Oh, yes, it always is. We
totally.
We want to thank the fans, of course.
Always, and forever.
Yes, and when you guys go to ampsandaxescast.com, make sure you click on all the social media and, of course, the Amazon banner, because that keeps the wind in the sails, so to speak, keeps the lights on, I guess. And,
That's right.
You know, when you go and visit, you want to make sure right underneath the episode you're going to see our good buddy,
Mr. Jason Sudeikis.
That's right, and he gives us the
quick lick.
That's right.
That's right.
And he's all moved in. He's doing some pretty crazy stuff, and we can't thank him enough.
Yeah, it's awesome. He's got a new video out for like the first cut of his new CD.
It's like 18 guitars in that video.
Oh, it's really cool. It's really cool. Yeah, and they also the whole thing sounds great. Oh, yeah. It sounds awesome.
It's insane. He's an amazing musician. You got to check him out if you haven't already.
For sure.
So we got a little bit of a shortness here. So I'm going to let you go ahead and do your thing because of what we did. We already recorded this, so you know.
Yeah, that's right. And we're gonna truncate ourselves here because this turned out to be a very long and, as far as we're concerned, a pretty incredible interview.
And he begged me, by the way, not to cut you off, but he begged me for a second piece because he wants to get us to the future, get us to the present.
Wait, what? We never even got to the present in this interview.
I think we got into the 2000s. That was it. Yes.
Yeah, barely. But there's so much history here, and it's so cool. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be right back with a guest of the week from Schaffer Vega, and now SoloDallas and the Schaffer replica. The man himself, Mr. Ken Schaffer.
Hey, this is Charlie Starr from Blackberry Smoke, and you are listening to Amps and Axes.
Okay, and we are back, as promised, with our guest of the week, the one and only Mr. Ken Schaffer. Ken, how are you?
I'm still okay.
Good. I just figured I'd check again. It was a whole 30 seconds. So I had to check again. But hey, thanks for taking the time, man.
One day I'm going to have to make a best of.
Oh, for sure.
As Phil Olivieri always calls me, uncle. Like, I'm a week younger than Hillary Clinton, so you got to stop that.
But you don't have pneumonia, I assume. So.
No, I had it in January.
When did I have mine? It was summer. It was Labor Day weekend.
And I got it in the winter.
Jesus.
Are you guys kidding? Did you really have pneumonia?
Yeah, I had pneumonia too. Yeah, man.
Oh, crap. I took my son. He turned 21, and he's a hacker. So I took him on his break from college. I took him to Berlin to go to the Chaos Computer Club.
Wow.
And, I could walk around Siberia, and I often have in the middle of winter in a T-shirt, and that's cool. I mean, it's okay. Berlin killed me.
Really?
I think I didn't dress properly. I took the plane to Berlin as if I was going to the Bahamas. And little did I know that it was Christmas Day and they closed all the stores until January 6th.
Wow.
Oh, my God.
So until I made friends in the neighborhood for hand-me-downs, I was walking around in T-shirts and short-sleeve shirts and no socks. And, I wasn't dressed for Berlin in the winter. And when I got back to New York, I actually went out to NAMM in L.A. for a week.
That's what'll do it.
See, that'll kill you in and of itself.
Yeah, without Berlin, yeah.
Right.
So I was coughing very, very badly. So when I got back to New York, I went to see a pulmonologist because I thought I had allergies or asthma or some, silly thing. And the guy, you know how a doctor puts a stethoscope on your back and he tells you, breathe deeply. Mm-hmm. Okay, hold your breath. Right? Breathe deeply again. Okay, now breathe normal. And he moves the stethoscope around you. This guy put the stethoscope on me for, I swear, I'm not exaggerating, 4 seconds, stationary. And he says, I'll give you 2 options. I go, huh? He goes, ambulance or Uber.
Oh, my God.
Whoa.
So wound up in the hospital for 3 weeks. And the first 2 weeks were in a hyperbaric chamber. And everyone who came to visit me had to wear a respirator.
Holy crap, man.
Wow.
I've never had an organic disease before, so I had drip things, and they have to drip so much into you. They install something in your arm, and they thread it through the vein to over your heart or somewhere like that.
Wow!
And they call it a peripheral. I don't know. I call it a USB. And with that USB, I had to continue on the drip for 6 weeks after I finally got home.
Jesus.
Like 4 times a day for an hour each. It was bloody. It's been a tough year.
Wow.
Well, thank God we're talking to you, man.
I guess I had the sniffles.
Yeah.
That's all I had.
Christ, I got a Z-Pack and was told to take it easy for 10 days.
Right. I just powered through like weekends worth of gigs.
Holy crap.
Wow. I never had it like that.
I think I had a pretty deep case of it.
Oh, my God.
And I've never been sick like that before. The worst I ever had was a broken toe.
Wow.
That's a big difference.
Yeah. My God. Well, glad you're here with us.
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Man, fire up, doctor. Oh, I mean, sir. Nick, Jeff, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so much for current history, but I like to get some real history from our guests and actually do what I call go in the Wayback Machine and find out where where our guest was born and raised and how. I usually ask you usually have to guess how they got into this musical field. With you, it's a little bit different. It's kind of in the electronics field, so we'll go that way. So, Ken, give us a little history, man. Where were you born and raised, and how did you get into electronics, and then how did that lead you into the musical field?
Well, the beginning was then my father was trying to watch the Friday night boxing stuff on TV, and the picture kept going in and out and in and out. And this is in the Bronx, yeah. And he sent me down to complain to the next building's superintendent, who was this guy who had a ham radio set. Yeah. So I go down to the next building at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and I go through the basement, and all the way back behind the boiler room were these noises. And I go, what is this? And I go up there, and there's Frank Schulte, that's his name, with his ham radio, and this is all heavy tube stuff. I mean, it was gorgeous. The smell of what's that? Ether? Yeah,
ozone.
Every time I think of ether now, I think of the Bitcoin competitor. But never mind. And there he was, and what he was doing is he was tapping out this telegraph key and talking to some guy in, I don't know, China or I knew it wasn't New Jersey, but it was really exotic and sexy.
Wow.
So I forgot to complain, and I forgot to go home. So some hours later, I came back with radios and parts and license manuals and so forth. And I wound up, I think I was 9. I got my ham radio license.
At 9?
And well, I mean, in ham radio, which a lot of people never heard of now because it's kind of useless. In ham radio, you have a lot of different subspecialties. Like some guys like to build equipment. Some guys like to chew the rag. Some guys like to bounce signals off the moon. And some guys like to work foreign countries, obscure piles of rocks like St. Helena's, wherever that is. And I became one of those guys, so I was collecting QSL cards, those confirmation cards that ham operators use, from every country I could get. And there were like 350 things that qualified as countries. Real countries plus piles of rocks that are 30 miles offshore. That's another country. So I was a DXer, and I was always into exotic signals like Mongolia would be cool. Guys who would call me from New Jersey would be ignored. And my whole life revolved around getting new countries and more exotic contacts. We didn't say very much. We just said, "You're a solid signal here in New York. My best regards to your family. Bye." It was not a very deep conversation, but you got the card, and that's all that counted.
Right. I used to work with a bunch of ham radio operators when I was in the electronics industry.
I had a neighbor that was
defense industry.
Yeah, I had a neighbor that was really hot, and he had an antenna that came off top of his house, went to a tree.
Oh yeah.
And then came down and grounded somewhere, or I don't even know, right? But all I know is when he would key that thing up, television screens got a little bit smaller than they were before he keyed it up. And the FCC would pull up.
It sounded like that guy just sucked all the juice out of the electric grid. But
he was pretty heavy.
Wow.
The FCC showed up at his house a couple times.
We called it, what was it called? TVI, television interference. And there was all sorts of filters, high-pass filters for the TV and low-pass filters for the ham transmitter that are down on the shortwave bands, way, way, way below VHF.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, as you can already see, that eventually led me into wireless because when I was out on Rolling Stones tours, I was out on Rolling Stones and Who tours and stuff like that, really because of my girlfriend at the time, who was their tour manager. She was the first female tour manager in rock and roll. And she did everyone from James Taylor and Lynyrd Skynyrd to The Who and the Rolling Stones. Her name is Lynn Volkman. She's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a great position where regular tour managers' girlfriends would come out on weekends while the guy suffers along the whole week. Let me do that again. Where usual tour managers of guys who bring their girlfriends out for the weekend. This was reversed. My girlfriend was out on the tour, and she brought her boyfriend out on the weekend. And I'll tell you, that's the way to tour. That is the way to tour.
Oh, yeah.
And the 75 Stones tour, it was called TOTA, Tour of the Americas. It was, I believe, the biggest tour in the universe at the time. It was the first time that they sold tickets behind the stage.
Wow.
It's when it's starting to get commercial here. No commercials, no advertisements and sponsors yet, but they started selling, little by little, they started selling seats behind the stage.
Wow.
So I guess if you were playing like a stadium, the stage would be like in the goal line, in the goal area. So those seats behind the stage were actually used.
Yeah.
You were looking at the back of Jagger's head.
You got it.
But you got to see the Rolling Stones.
And as a courtesy to those people sitting in the seats where they just see the back of the back, Jagger would go around back, 3 or 4 or 5 times during the set with the best wireless microphone at the time. And he'd go shake it up for the girls back there. But every night that he did it was another disaster.
Wow.
At best, it sounded terrible because the signal-to-noise ratio and dynamics were not acceptable, but, he's just going back there as a concession. It would fade out, yeah. And sometimes it would pick up either police calls or even taxi dispatch, like, we've got a floater at 34th Street. And it was sort of very unseemly, but through my eyes, it was just a bad radio. I mean, all the wireless guitar, there were no wireless guitars at the time. I was first on that. But all the wireless microphone, which is just a different form factor, all the wireless mic was a transmitter in the microphone and a receiver. And after that, it corresponds to the rules of radio physics, which limits your dynamic range because in those days, the FM transmitter was only allowed to, it's called deviate 5 kilohertz. And with the laws of physics, with 5 kilohertz deviation, you could only get something like 70 dB of signal-to-noise ratio. Wow. In fact, what I recognized it was the same as tape, because 15 or 30 IPS tapes in the studio, because I was working in studios also, but you could only get 60 or 70 dB onto tape. There was a limited medium as far as dynamic range until Dolby and DBX came along. And what they did was very clever. I think both of them are almost the same.
Wow, you're breaking up right there, Ken.
Yeah, Ken, are you tight on the microphone?
Am I tight on it?
Yeah, because we're getting some modulation. I think
it's. I don't know whether it's breath or movement.
I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll try not to do either.
No, please continue to breathe.
Yeah, we need you to breathe.
No, as I was telling the story, I started swinging in the chair. It's one of those springy chairs. So.
Oh, okay.
You want me to back up? Or?
Oh, that
sounds great.
Right there. Whatever you're doing right now.
I'm paralyzed. Okay.
Sorry about that, man.
Okay. Radio was a very limited medium because of the maximum deviation you could use legally. And the limit was, I forget whether it was 60, 65, 70 dB. And that's your headroom, that's your dynamic range, that's your signal-to-noise ratio, which is okay for a preacher man. But when you turn up your stage amps to 110 dB, 60 dB down there, it sounds like a waterfall. So the first thing I had to do was attack that limitation. And really, I stole from the best because I recognized that in the studio, we were already starting to get 100 dB signal-to-noise ratio and dynamic range off an equally limited medium called magnetic tape at 15 or 30 IPS. Mm-hmm. Magnetic tapes also have a limited headroom. So DBX and Dolby came along, and what they would do was essentially would compress. They would process, when they would do a lot of pre-processing, but they would compress the recorded signal by a factor of 2 to 1 typically, put it onto the limited tape, and then when you play back, you expand 1 to 2, and you get back your original dynamics, and the noise drops out.
Now,
so that was the first thing to attack and really make it usable for rock and roll sound levels. Second was the fading. The fading was a matter of that with a VHF radio, you only have a wavelength of a couple of meters. And as you walk, you'll go through peaks and troughs of the signal.
Yeah, dead spots, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what I did there was I used a system that was actually created by the U.S. Army Signal Corps in the 20s. That's the 1920s. There was a guy, Lieutenant Beulah Binken, who was the originator of diversity reception. And diversity reception was used on the long path between the United States and Europe on shortwave. And what they found was there would be fading as the ionosphere would go up and down. The shortwave signal would fade, just like you have dropout with VHF wireless mics. And with diversity, what you do is you set up a second receiver with the antenna at least a wavelength away. And when one would fade out, the other one would not fade out. So in those days, you could switch between the antennas, probably with a big jackknife switch.
Mm-hmm.
But in our days, we could do it, with microprocessors. Well,
electronically,
we did microprocessors, but we did it with what the heck did we use? I forget. But we had a circuit that would detect which signal was getting the best signal. It would switch to that, and if it started fading out, it would look at the other antenna. Actually, it's not only antenna; it's the whole front end of a receiver. But that allowed us to do the switching at a lower frequency, at the high frequency of the antenna. So you would switch after it was down converted to the intermediate frequency, and it would make a much cleaner synapse. So by putting two antennas a wavelength apart, and that's how it worked, for every diversity radio, you just look at entirely different antenna environments, and between the two, you could not, almost 100% could not get a fade out. And finally, interference, those floaters on 33rd Street. We just used brute force. They're mechanical filters called helical resonators, and they were clunky, but they did the job. They would just notch out the frequencies that you want to use and drop everything else off. So we were able to get the signal-to-noise ratio and dynamic range where we needed it. We were able to prevent dropouts, and we were able to prevent interference. So having done that, I looked around for a customer. And early on into my work, I started out working to make a better wireless microphone. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't too long into that where I diverted to make the first wireless guitar, which actually is a lot more difficult to transmit than a voice signal. when it was more challenging. That's like the DX from Mongolia. So,
is it because of the harmonic content? It has such a larger frequency range?
Yeah, the attack and the harmonic content, and the attack is much sharper.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot more critical to do the processing.
And you're not a musician, right?
Well, no. I mean, when you were learning how to play guitar, I was the world's champion Morse code operator. I had the second highest Morse code speed in the world. I got beaten by a guy who, he died about 30, 40 years ago, so now I have no one I could talk to. And
now you hold the record.
Yeah, I still do it. I do the inputs of my cell phone. I frequently do in Morse code.
I love it.
I have a little app that does that. It's a little bit more accurate than Siri, but and it's the most useless skill to have. Like I said, when I was in high school and the other guys were learning how to play licks on a guitar, I was chugging away at Morse code on shortwave. And I'd go to the lawn behind my school, and there'd be some guy with a guitar, and he'd pull his shirt off in the spring, lean against a tree, and all the girls would get around him. And, this kind of story.
Never heard it before. No.
It happens to me all the time.
Right, exactly.
I'd be over at my table sending, nobody even looks at me. What is that fucking guy, And you can't even... about 10 or 15 years ago, they made it where the last vestige of usefulness for Morse code was on ships at sea, which by international law had to have a telegraph operator aboard. That got knocked out, when everybody went to satellites. In fact, satellites knocked out Morse code because ships now have satellite dishes with a lot of bandwidth, and you don't have to go boo, 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 boo. And then, when I was playing with ham radio and shortwave, it was very romantic and sexy because every time you turned it on, you'd go to a certain frequency at a given time of year, given time of the day or night, even at a given time of the 11-year sunspot cycle. And if you really got at one with it, like you are with your instrument, if you really got at one with a shortwave band, they call it a band too, huh? If you really got at one with a shortwave band, you know what frequency to go to get a signal from here to name that place. And sometimes you'd use 7 megahertz, sometimes 14, sometimes 21. And you really become at one with the ionosphere and all that radio propagation stuff. So, but you never knew every time you turned it on if you'll be able to get through to Australia. Sometimes yes and sometimes no. Now, that romance video killed the radio star. That got completely destroyed by the internet.
Yeah.
Where you might have noticed you have almost 100% to name that tune. There it is.
Yeah.
So gone is the romance of shortwave.
The romance of Skip.
Until the EMP hits.
I was just going to say that. He'll be doing
Morse code,
ones and zeros on a key with a tube transmitter to somebody.
Absolutely.
And he'll be the only one that knows how to do it. For sure.
Wow. So this all was taking place in the mid-'70s?
Well, no, that was the radio. The radio thing for me was in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
And the Rolling Stones tour, the first one that I was associated with, was in 1975. Mm-hmm. So after the Toto tour, I went back to New York, and I was convinced I could make a better radio than that. And I guess I did.
I guess you did.
Yeah, you kind of changed the world a little bit in music.
Well, it was radio, but you asked where it all came from, and it came from being a 9-year-old ham operator with my mother afraid to walk into my room for all the snaking wires on the floor and the ether and ozone smell. She was terrified of me.
She might get electrocuted.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And okay, now having built the first couple of units, I needed a customer, and this is kind of funny. The first guy I picked on was Gene Simmons, who was sort of a neighbor. So Gene comes over, and I show him my wireless. This is the guitar. And he didn't get it at all. And I'm jumping up and down screaming, Gene, you could put staging together. You could run 100 feet away from the monitor speakers. And he didn't get it at all.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. So about a month or 2 or 3 or 4 weeks after Gene sort of didn't get it, I got a phone call on a late Friday night. And it was Gene calling from Lakeland, Florida, saying, "You still got those wireless things?" Huh? Well, anyway, it turned out Ace Frehley, Kiss's guitar player, had apparently been electrocuted.
Yeah.
And resuscitated and all that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
the ground came up and he touched the iron pipe that was part of the stage.
Yep.
And good night to Ace. So Gene asked me if I still had these things because he remembered something I'd mentioned incidentally. I could keep you from getting electrocuted too, but I was emphasizing the freedom of getting rid of the wire and running around and all that. But
right.
what he thought was an insurance policy.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I saw my guitar player, die on stage. Do you still have that wireless thing that I can't get electrocuted with?
Right.
I saw sparks come out from over there, and then he fell down.
So Kiss was, in fact, the first band to order them, and they ordered a bunch of them. But they weren't my favorite band. Somehow I connected with Jeff Lynne.
Oh, wow.
And ELO, well, he was interested for ELO. And when that order came through a couple of days or a couple of weeks after Gene's, I delivered it to ELO first.
So let me ask you, Ken, because when we talked to Phil, he told us these units were ridiculous money for 1975. Like today they would be $20,000-$30,000 a piece.
Really?
Well, what were you charging? They were like $2,000, right?
I think we had 3 stages. Of the $4,100 was the first.
Wow!
Holy crap!
I think at some point we went up to $4,400 or even $4,750. But I think 4,100 is the number that sticks in my head, the loudest.
Well, think about it. In relative terms, in today's
Jeez.
money, that would be like a $20,000 wireless unit. In today's money, I mean, because
probably.
$4,400 in 75, you were buying cars for $3,000.
Oh, you're right. A Jaguar XKE, my favorite, was $5,000.
Yeah. And that was the high end.
I remember signs in the 70s back in New Jersey for the Volkswagen dealer and the Bug, the Beetle.
$1,600.
$14.99, $13.99, something like that. Yeah.
So this wireless system was the only reason, and I say this because
you could buy 4 Volkswagens.
I remember exactly. I remember, when would it have been? It would have probably been like the early 80s. Like 80, 81, I would see pictures of Eddie Van Halen with that chain strap that he had. Mm-hmm. And you would see this wire
lacing through
the chain. And I was like, what in the hell is that? And everybody was like, that's his wireless system. And I'm like, look, this Nady doesn't have that kind of antenna on it. I'm like, what is that thing? And everybody was like, I don't know, man. It doesn't have a name. And all you see is this little, you see the plug going in. It looked like a George L. cable going into the guitar, that thin cable that George L uses for their cables. That was going into the output jack of the guitar, and then it disappeared, right? Because they never took a shot of the back of Eddie Van Halen. And then you see this wire coming over the front, and I'm like, what the hell is that? So obviously it was Ken's device. Which cost like 4 Volkswagens.
Well, I never really thought about it like that. I was just doing a multiple of what it costs to produce. And at that time in electronics, you usually do 5 times the cost of parts and labor is the retail price. And that's just a general rule.
Yeah.
And I didn't get any more refined than that because I was not really an electronics manufacturer. But I knew that general rule, and it was about 5 times what it was costing me, or maybe 4 times what it was costing me. And by the end of the day, that wasn't like a huge profit thing.
No.
I never really did any of that stuff to make a business out of it. Really, the quest was just to do it, and any money that I ever made has just spilled off of it. The same thing. Many years later, I invented the You've probably heard of the Sling Box.
Why have I heard of this thing?
Well, I invented something called place shifting, which allows you to take your cable TV subscription anywhere in the world you go.
Slingbox, I remember this thing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Slingbox is who did it right. When you mentioned Nady, I was selling for $4,100. Nady was selling for $200 or $300.
Oh yeah. I owned one. It was horrible.
Well, it was horrible, and by the same token, Sling, which eventually got bought by Dish Networks for $360 million, came along 2-3 years after me. But whereas I made my thing called TV to Me, was super high quality. You just couldn't get 1 decibel better. Incredible video over 256 kilobits worldwide.
Wow.
But I was selling them again for the area of $4,500. And there weren't a lot of people who could justify $4,500 on TV, especially people, not a lot of Americans, for example, leave the country. So, if you stay domestic, you could use satellites and get the same programs pretty much that you get off your cable box. But if you go outside I was going to Russia a lot, and I'd spend a lot of time in St. Petersburg, and I kind of missed my Seinfeld reruns live.
What technology did you transmit the signals with?
It was one of the first MPEG-4 encoders.
Holy crap.
And,
wow.
It's all there on, you link from Wiki or whatever, or on my personal website. There are a lot of articles about it, but the point is that what I learned about manufacturing or introducing a breakthrough technology or disruptive technology is get some freaking money. Because I was doing everything out of my pocket, both with the wireless and again with the TV to Me or the place shifting. Other guys, whether it be Nady or it be Sling, which is now like a trade name for the whole genre, the Sling Box. But I was there 2 years before. I have a great letter from Sting because he was the first person to ever have a place shifter, and he used it to watch. Get ready for this: Newcastle United. The poor guy. And he would stall going on stage if it was at the end of a match. I mean, to watch you don't get between an Englishman and his team.
No, you don't.
No.
So what happened is Sling, and I say this more as a metaphorical thing. They paused. They let the other guy invent it. Then they come along and make it as cheap as they could. And they raised $30 or $40 million, and they hired the best guys to sit in all the chairs they needed in a company. Marketing, PR, advertising. I don't think they spent very much on technology, but that's my opinion. And yeah, it's a piece of crap. But they're in the window of Best Buy.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'm not. And in the window of Best Buy, you see local Moscow TV or whatever whatever foreign TV you want. And just even if you have it in black and white with sparklies, you go, wow, that's amazing. And that's sort of the story of the Nady wireless.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, in my case, and it's not my motto or anything, but in my case, I do things really as a hobbyist or as an amateur. I think the amateur word comes from lover as opposed to professional, which comes from hooker. No. A lot of people think that professional is a qualitative. A lot of people, I think maybe most people think that professional and amateur are qualitative assessments, and obviously a professional is much better than an amateur. Hello?
Not necessarily.
No, not at all.
So it's safe to say that it's safe to say, Ken, that you're a genius.
Yeah.
I mean,
pretty safe.
I mean,
to say.
it's pretty safe to say that you're absolutely a genius. You came up with this wireless system when none existed that were worth anything. You fixed that problem that artists had, gave this freedom, and then, but along with that, these bands, which would have been obviously ELO, Kiss, the Stones, Van Halen.
Yeah.
AC/DC.
Right, I was going to say there's Eddie and AC/DC for sure.
But the AC/DC thing, because of Phil and his craziness.
Oh, yeah.
He figured out the secret behind those essential albums, Highway to Hell, Back in Black, and For Those About to Rock, of how Angus was able to make just
get
a Marshall,
that tone.
A Marshall and a SG sound like no other Marshall and SG on the planet, and it was because of your system, right?
Incidentally, that's true. I mean, when I say incidentally, my objective when I first set out was to make a wireless link that was transparent. It was identical to a cord, not a drop better, not a drop worse.
Wow.
And that was my design objective. And I kind of thought I hit that. But then after, some months of, a lot of bands getting the stuff, I'd get anecdotes called into me from people who were in the studio where, Frank Zappa is using it to record. Huh? Why would somebody use it to record when the amp is 5 feet away?
Exactly.
And my ears, I mean, I don't know that my ears are any good. Well, they were any good. They're no good now. But Derringer was, I think, the first band that I heard was using in the studio. Then Zappa, then Angus, of course. And a whole variety, just like a whole spread of bands were using in the studio. And obviously because it did something to the sound. Mm-hmm. That was never the design objective, but, I'm not fighting it. It's good.
It's totally good. I mean, it
literally changed the face of rock and roll.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe it was as close to perfect. Well, some of the characteristics that it does really wouldn't play towards this. But I was thinking maybe it was as perfect as a 5-foot cord, but not a 20-foot cord. Because 20-foot cable will do something to your sound, even a good one. Well, they've got really good cables now, but back in the day, you get a 20-foot coil cord, and it's a huge difference in sound. And I remember when they first came out with that they were the first what I knew to be digital wireless units. They were so good that they actually were, I don't know whether it was the manufacturer or guys that were using them, were putting capacitors in the plug on the guitar end of it.
Knock out the highs.
Yeah, to knock out the highs to simulate a cable because it was
too good.
It was too good, right? Yeah.
Well, I just remember when I got my 80, because I see Eddie Van Halen jumping all over the place and running all over the place, and he's got this wireless. Mm-hmm. And I put it in. They had this little gain knob. That's all it had, right? And it was horrible. I was like, this is the worst thing on the planet. And everybody's like, well, you got to get the one with 2 antennas. So then I got the
diversity,
one.
Right.
Yeah, and I was like, well, that's great because now the signal never stops sounding like crap. and I'm like, what do they have? Nobody could ever answer that. And now the secret is out. And, of course, through Phil's obsession...
Yes, sickness, obsession. I meant.
Yes, they now are reverse engineering it. So when these guys,
wait, I call Phil. He picked up on this right away. I call Phil an isolated obsessive.
That's right. He did
say that you called him.
He
that.
said that on the interview. Yes.
Well, actually, I stole that from Sting, who used that expression for me and 3 other friends of his. He says, my best friends are isolated obsessives. That's kind, And
thank you, I think.
I just love that expression because that's where it comes from. It's like, as an inventor, I don't think it's any different than a songwriter. You don't have the licks have you. And I don't have the ideas have me.
Wow.
And great ideas, they come to many, give or take a minute or 2. Bad ideas, you get exclusively.
Oh, I'm going to have to...
That's pretty damn funny.
We're going to have to get these quotes on...
That is
we're going to lock them
funny.
in. I like that. So, all told, how many of these units did you sell during the day to these big artists?
They're about 1,000. Never really kept accounting very tight, but about 1,000 units.
Did you hand build all these yourself?
No.
Okay.
They were built out in California by Vega.
By Vega. That's where the Schaffer Vega True Diversity System came
Vega
from.
was a company that was building wireless, fairly god-awful stuff. And I acquired the best of what they made and, added a lot of things and so forth. And
now, was that Vega the same Vega that was associated with Serwin?
No, it's actually it's not. A lot of people think so, but it's C-Tech Vega. CETEC.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I don't know if they still exist or not, but they had a great manufacturing facility, and they were really a radio shop. They were able to build RF stuff really well.
Yeah, I was going to say, because building RF is a different animal than like building an amplifier, whether it's tube or solid state. RF is a whole different thing. What frequency did they run?
Well, my biggest problems with Vega is that they didn't have a guitar amp, a guitar player, so they weren't able to test the things very well. And every unit that we put out was tested by our shop in New York, where we really gave it hell.
Wow.
Well, they should have at least been able to test its proper functionality, I would think.
Yeah. Hey, it turns on.
Yeah, well, more so than that. I mean, I've worked in labs with RF for a long, long time. And there's a certain amount of things you can absolutely test.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the RF part they did solid every time, but the audio part was a lot more fussy. Because the compander chips, we were the first to compand. You know what companding in the transmitter, we'd compress.
And then it's expansion on the other end, right? Expand.
They were very touchy. We had to really mess around very critically with something called pre-emphasis and or de-emphasis.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of things that just didn't apply to formula. It's like stereo speakers or whatever. You can't hear it if you're looking at a text sheet. If you look at a spec sheet, you can't tell what it sounds like, no matter what the spec is.
What frequencies did they run on, Ken?
Well, in those days, the legal frequencies were locally unused television channels. Typically 170 megahertz, 183, below 200 megahertz, and above 160 megahertz. Usually we'd pick on channel 8 because that's the least used analog television frequency in the air.
Mm-hmm.
But the radios were pretty tight with those helical resonators. We were able to operate right under a channel 8 transmitter almost everywhere in the world without any problem, except at the Budokan in Tokyo. For some reason, no matter what we did at Budokan in Tokyo, we'd get blasted out.
Wow. Such an iconic place, too. It's like if it's one place you want it to work, it's probably Budokan.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's safe to say that you probably had very close relations with these artists because, well, we're guitar players and we're the most neurotic people on the planet. And tone is like, we'd give up a digit if we knew we could still play.
Only on the right hand.
Yeah, for the tone. So the guys that you were, tight with, I mean, I've seen these pictures of you and Angus. You're like hanging out and stuff.
Well, Angus was like, I forget exactly how I met Angus, but he wound up being at my house on the first tour where they came to New York or they laid down in New York for a while. Angus was up here in my apartment all the time. And in fact, Michael Browning was his manager back then. Michael went to my landlady to take the apartment adjoining mine. There's only 2 apartments on the floor I live. Mm-hmm. And Michael tried to get that for Angus, but he arrived like an hour after the landlord sealed the deal with someone else.
Wow.
So Angus would have been my neighbor. And we're not that far apart in age, but he was like, at that time, he was like my little brother. I guess when you're in your 20s and stuff, like somebody who's 4 years younger than you is like a little brother.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
It's all relative. Yeah, that's crazy. And maybe it was for the best.
Yeah. Well, a lot of bands I had a lot to do with. A lot of bands I had very little to do with. It would be handled by their roadies or guitar techs.
Mm-hmm.
And it always worked, so nobody bothered me. In the beginning, it was with the artists every time.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, always working is a very good thing, but, then there's not much interaction.
So 1,000 units. You were selling to most of the major acts that were out there. I mean,
Phil has them on his SoloDallas website. He has a pretty comprehensive list.
Wow.
In fact, he probably has a more comprehensive list than I would have if I was doing it on my own. But Pink Floyd was a good one, though. I'll tell you a nice story.
Yeah.
So Pink Floyd ordered a whole bunch of, I forget, like a dozen or 20. They bought a huge number of units.
Wow.
And then we shipped them over to the UK. And as it turned out, they were going to be rehearsing in a blimp hangar, a dirigible hangar north of London. And they set up their stage, and they went into rehearsals, and it was the biggest stage ever mounted on tour. In fact, they had 2 or 3 different copies of it. Go out to cities at the same time, different cities.
Right.
Because it was so, to set it up.
At that point, something that big, you have to leapfrog it. When you finish in this city, you're off to the 3 cities past this.
Yeah, because the stage is already being built the next day. Yeah,
got to be.
I think they may have been the first to do that. At least I think they may have been the first to do that leapfrogging. And I get a phone call at like 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning in New York, and it's Pink Floyd's road manager. They have just set up this huge tour, this huge stage for the Wall tour. And Schaffer, we're fucked. Huh? What do you mean we're fucked? What are you talking about? It's the wireless. They don't work. I said, what do you mean don't work? You got like 20 of them. They don't work. And, flashing before his eyes was this entire stage is going to get broken down. It's useless. You can't use it. And I said, well, listen, you got to be more specific. You got all these units. Can you tell me what's wrong?
Right. What's not working?
How is it they don't work? And finally, the guy was really under a lot of pressure. You could tell.
Of course.
It's the delay. The delay. Okay. I said, well, at first I took it serious. Well, wait a minute. The radios go at the speed of light. How big is your stage? And then
it's light years from here.
The monitors, of course, look at the speed of sound. You're talking about 1,000 feet per second instead of 300 million meters per second. In the case of the radio. So as the guys in the band would walk 100 feet or 200 feet, their monitors, they'd be delayed, 1 foot per millisecond. So if they go 200 feet away, it's a fifth of a second out of sync. And at that point, it's kind of unusable because you have one guy walking 200 milliseconds that way, another guy walking 200 milliseconds the opposite way.
Got almost a half a second between them.
They could not play.
Right.
They could not play. And they were terrified that, their expensive stages would be, they'd have to stand in place as per usual. So I listened to the problem, and, it just occurred to me we had to either make radio go at the speed of sound or make sound go at the speed of light. I never thought of it that way before.
That's pretty funny.
Wow. And what I did pretty quickly was get a bunch of crystal-controlled VHF pocket receivers. They're sort of obscure, but I knew where to get them. And we could get little mono receivers.
Did you do the first in-ears?
I didn't even know it was an in-ear. I was just trying to solve a problem. So with earphones, whatever kind of earphones I could find, just plug them in your ear. And they were in-ear monitors. Little did I ever imagine that one day everybody is going to be using them, wired, wireless, whatever.
Wow.
I didn't get it at all. I just thought it was a specific solution for a one-time problem.
Holy crap.
Pink Floyd, in fact, went out with those contraptions in their ears, and they probably were the first to have radio monitors. And I don't think I ever did any more for anybody else. I missed the wagon on that.
Ken, did you have a patent on the wireless system at least?
No, I never patented it. Although your friend Nady patented it several years later. And he does post it a lot, on his website and whatever. But if you look at the patent, you'll see right at the end, the patent was, what do they call it? Expunged?
Oh, really?
Wow.
You look up his patent, and it covers all the stuff that my unpatented system had. But
so it was already
issued, and then it was, I forget what they call it when a patent is taken back by the patent office.
Rescinded, expunged, rescinded. I don't know.
Not expunged, rescinded, or no, whatever. But his patent has been void, and it's right at the end in small type on the patent.
Funny.
If you go to the patent office website,
because you already had the technology out there for a while, so it was in essence, I guess, public domain.
I've been told I could have challenged his patent,
Probably.
which is something I never bothered doing. And somebody may have brought up the fact that we were like a page or two in Rolling Stone, and a lot of publications said the future of rock and da-da-da-da. And that was years before he applied for his patent.
Wow.
So, you can't patent something once the technology is published.
Right.
Or, even once it's marketed and so forth, and, a bunch of arcane rules. But I wasn't the one who challenged it. Somebody else must have.
I know somebody else that has been getting away with that for a while.
Yeah,
too,
yeah, we've had that discussion.
Anything.
You got to go back to the first 2 episodes to hear that.
And I'll read you one thing. Just hang on one sec.
Yeah.
I got my wall over here. I love it.
Man, he's inventing stuff he doesn't even know.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
Well, listen, my Morse code thing. Now, I could send Morse code just using my thumb and my index finger, using a little paddle. You hold the little tiny paddle to one side, it goes di-di-di-di-di-di-di, and the other side da 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 da. So just by moving your thumb and your index finger, you can send messages. And because I've been doing it so long, Morse code is as normal, easy to me as speaking. I don't have to translate and think about it. So when I hear Morse code well sent, it's like somebody talking in my ear. But what happens, like when you mention ideas, like those ideas that you get in the middle of the night when you're sort of like one nod awake and mostly asleep, and they're really profound. They're great ideas. And if you turn on a light to write it down, well, it's not only just turning on the light, because writing is very complex eye, ear, hand coordination, all that kind of stuff. So when you turn on the light and grab a pencil, by that time the idea is gone because you've used large muscle groups and coordinated and so forth, and it knocks the idea right out of your head.
Yeah.
So I'm realizing that I went to bed one night realizing that I probably am the human being ever born who could transcribe information with the least amount of effort or thought or movement, because instead of using my mouth or pencil, I can move my thumb and my forefinger.
Wow.
And Morse code did it very fast, and it just comes out. So in the early days of computers, I had a little, green against black screen. In one room I had a little computer. I think it was a DEC Rainbow or something. I don't know.
Good God.
And I had wires that went through a hole into my bedroom that went to my bed, where I had 3 wires attached to a telegraph key. You had a common, and one was dit and one was da.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the telegraph key in my bed. And a lot of people would ask, what the hell? It's odd looking. So I remember one night an idea came to me, and I was able to just squeeze my fingers and get out enough keywords to send to the screen in the other room. And in the morning, I could get up, and I did, and I ran to watch what the profound thought was. And it was something like, there is a draft when the window is open. Which really seemed very profound at the time. And that's about some of those ideas they found at the time. So here's a letter from Sting. It's on Sting Stationery, and it's addressed to the editor of Time magazine, who declared the sling box the greatest invention of 2005. Dear editors, now remember, Sting was an English teacher. Well, he's also kind of good with words. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, dear editors, I'll admit it's been a long time since I was an English teacher. However, I still recall that the terms breakthrough and invention refer to the first of a kind. Thus, I don't understand how Time magazine could award its Breakthrough Award for cutting-edge breakthrough invention of the year to Sling Media for its Sling Box. In 2003, which I am confident is 2 years before 2005, I purchased TV to me from my friend Kenny Schaffer. Kenny devised place shifting, the ability to push great pictures across the world over little wires, to allow people like me, traveling constantly, to maintain a sense of home. Because of TV to me, I could watch my team, Newcastle United, wherever I am, working or playing. I thought I'd tell you of your mistake so that the proper adjective modifies the correct noun.
Wow.
That came from Sting.
Good on him, man. That's awesome that he actually took the time to give you props, and to
oh my God,
tell them that you really need to dig a little further before you write an article.
Freaking Sting writes into that.
I like that last line that is just telling you of your mistakes. So that the proper adjective modifies the correct noun. Yeah.
Right.
Well, by the way, Time Magazine replied in kind. They did say that their job as journalists is to, report on things of usefulness to their readers, and that the Sling box, because it was $200, may be useful to their readers, where this contraption for $4,000 and change is not. So, you could argue, you can not.
Well, there's also the commercially availability aspect of it.
Yeah, for sure. And, that argument from Time, or the defense from Time Magazine, is, it has some validity to it. I can see that.
It does. But, I mean, geez, you got to give Sting props for
absolutely,
for recognizing that and for enjoying its ability so much.
Well, we go back. We have some blood together. I mean, Sting, on the first Police tour, I gave the keys to my office to them, so they could come and sleep on the floor of my office instead of crowding into the Econoline van with the roadies and the Altex.
Wow.
So, that goes back that far. But, the other thing that I invented, another version of radio, is I invented the contraption that let government agencies and then some universities eavesdrop on internal Soviet television. And this is during the Cold War. And that got a lot of press because the newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, they did all stories, new spy device, let's us, on Russians, do. And it was a very complicated sort of satellite tracking system, not your usual thing, that would bring us the internal television of the former of the Soviet Union at that time. It would let us eavesdrop, literally, on the internal television of the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And that was seen as by some people as a great spy device. To me, it was just distant signals, just like the ham operator in Mongolia,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be happy to watch Test Pattern if it was coming from a strange, exotic place. But in any case, it was Russia. And Sting had read about it in some magazine or newspaper. So when he got to New York, and this would be in this would be 1985, 1986. He called up and he says, "I want to come and see that thing." And I had calls from like hundreds of people wanted to come and see the thing. It was like voyeurism, like looking into the window into the Soviet bedroom, the Iron Curtain and all that. So Sting wanted to see it in action because he's sort of intelligent and curious and all that. So I had my first sort of public system was at Columbia University, which is not so far from Hotel Row in Manhattan. And he was staying at the Navarro, which was where all the rock people, everybody would stay. Well, not everybody, but a lot of guys. So one day, I know I could take this one too far. It's too funny. It might be convoluted, but you might can edit it, whatever. One day, Sting picks me up. It's a Friday night, and Sting picks me up in front of my house in a limo. And I go down, get into the limo, and there's a girl sitting in the back and introduces me to Jenny. So, we have a fine time, and we ride up to Columbia University up near Harlem. And I had those days, I had the keys to the outside building, to the elevator, to the 12th floor, to all the rooms in the Harriman Institute. It was my joint.
Mm-hmm.
Because this particular device that let us get Russian TV became the greatest asset to Columbia's endowment since they discovered the neutrino.
Wow.
So they got a lot of kudos. They had nothing to do with it, but whatever. So we go into the television room, and I turn on the TV, and it was in the middle of Porgy and Bess in English. And Sting turns to me. He looks a little confused, and he goes, "It's not Russian." And I just am able to smile beatifically and nod my head. That's what they watch on their national network, Porgy and Bess in English, and other stuff. And the rest of the programming was like Russian kids shows and Russian Sesame Street because it was like midnight in New York. It was 8 o'clock in the morning in Moscow.
Uh-huh.
So we're watching Saturday morning children's programming. And here's a part you might want to cut out. It's too much, but to me it's so much a part of the story. After an hour or so, I realized that the director of the Harriman Institute at Columbia, it's called the W. Averill Harriman Institute for Advanced Study of the Soviet Union, Jonathan Sanders, lived a few blocks away, and that I think he and Sting would love to meet, because Sting was so curious about the Soviet stuff. What is this? What is that? And I don't know. I just do Windows. I don't know what that is. So I called Jonathan and said, Jonathan, why don't you and Arlene, his wife at the time, why don't you guys come up? I have Sting here. And they go, Sting? Yeah, Sting from the Police. Yeah, you'd love each other. Okay. So half an hour later, Jonathan walks in with his wife. So it's now Sting and Jenny and Jonathan, Arlene, and me. And they got along famously. They got along as famously as did Phil Olivieri and Angus Young when I brought Phil up to Vancouver to meet Angus. Like nice. It's like I could sit back in the easy chair and watch them volley together, sort of like Mick and Jeff, bang, bang, finish each other's sentences. It was fantastic introducing them. I could have fallen out the window and disappeared. They wouldn't have noticed.
Right.
And to me, that's a success. So Sting and Jonathan got along just the same way. It was like watching a volleyball, bang, 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 ping pong, or whatever it is. Except for one thing. After an hour, every time Jonathan or Arlene referred to Sting by name, they would call him Stretch.
Oh, my God.
And I let it go down like 7 or 8 or 10 times, okay, let it go. And finally it was too much. And I said, these are all my friends here, so I can do what I want. Jonathan, Arlene, what is with you? This guy, he's the biggest, musician anywhere. His name is Sting, not Stretch. And his band is the Police, not the Policemen. And anyway, it was fine. It was not terribly embarrassing. And after
he's a
another
tall
hour,
gentleman.
Jonathan and Arlene take off, go home, because it's very late for university professor people, Mm-hmm. So it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. Sting and Jenny and I decide to leave. We close up all the doors and lock the elevator and down. We go down into the car. And the car goes downtown through Central Park and drops Sting at the Navarro Hotel, which is on 6th Avenue and 59th Street. And Jenny and I keep going on into New York nightlife. Okay, everything's fine. So it's like 10 o'clock now the next morning. And having gone to sleep little but late, there's a knock at the door. What is this? Who the hell come to my house at 10 o'clock? And I open the door. It's Danny Quattrochi, who's Sting's tech. He still is. He's Sting's right-hand tech guy.
Nice.
And he hands me a cassette that has a little label on it, Russians for Kenny. And I said, well, I'll play it later. He said, no, you got to play it. As it turns out, it was what Sting had done when he got back to the hotel. He had a synclavier in his room. He wrote the song Russians.
Wow.
And I listened to it, and I'm going, holy crow. To have any part of inspiring or whatever you call it,
Yeah.
I felt so great because that is a particularly brilliant song, I thought, and not your usual rock and roll trash. It was really, it was really good stuff. So I'm buzzing like, well, I'm not going to be able to fall asleep again. And then the phone rings. Who the hell calls me on Sunday? Okay. Hello?
Sting.
Kenny, this is Arlene.
Oh.
It was Jonathan's wife, Arlene. And I'm all over her. I said, that was so funny last night. And you calling Sting Stretch. I thought that was the greatest thing ever. Okay. And she said, yes. Okay. Yeah. She says, I only have one question for you. I said, well, what's that? She said, where did you meet Jennifer Beals? I go, what? Okay, it turns out she recognized the Jenny was Jennifer Beals, the girl who starred in Flashdance.
Holy shit.
And, well, you've heard the expression, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Well, I'm beating the heck out of them for calling Sting Stretch, and I'm running around all over town with Jennifer Beals, and I didn't know it was her.
Holy hell.
So I learned one. But there are other things, by the way, like some of my other favorite stories.
I don't even know where to go with that one. I don't even know where to go with that one.
Ken, you got to give us a second.
well, I could keep going. So
no, please do.
Recorded it. I'll tell you something no one knows. After he recorded it, and it opened the Grammy Awards the next year. I guess it was 1987 or something. Before the titles, they had, CBS, exactly 8 o'clock, curtains open, and there's the band going, in Europe and America. Holy moly, that was wonderful. And it was a really good record for him. So when he recorded it, they released it as a single, and he gave me 2 boxes. I think it was 25, 45 RPM records in each box. So I had 50 of them to bring to my friends in Russia. So I bring over the records to Russia, and I give them out to all the guys I know. And like most of my friends were underground musicians and artists and, crazy people from the Leningrad underground scene. And I was very proud of Sting and the song, and I was really tickled by my, remote connection with its coming into being. So I gave the records out to everybody. And, I go back to New York. And in those days, I had a company in Russia. I was going back and forth every month. I go back to New York, and then I go back to Russia, and I run into most of the 50 people, and I ask them, what did you think of the song? It's terrible.
Terrible.
It's disgusting. I mean, everybody's all over me. It's the most horrible song they ever heard. I said, what? How anyone could ask such a question? Do Russians love their children too? If Russians love their children too, I hope the Russians love their children too. Russians love children so much, if no food, give caviar to baby. So all these people took a great insult at Sting having asked that question. Every stanza ended with a question. Do Russians love their children too? And all that. So I run into Sting on my next visit to New York. And he says, what did your friends think of the song? I don't do a good Sting impression, but they hated it, man. They hated it. And he gets stuck for a second with his eyes going, what? And I explained this to him, that, they all, how can you ask such a question, such an insult? We love our children. Well, Sting actually went into the studio to re-record some of the end lines, and he changed it from a question, if Russians love, do Russians love, I hope Russians love. He changed it to, because Russians love, I know that Russians love their children too. And you know what? He never did a press release on that.
Wow.
He did that out of his own pocket and for his own head. So,
I can see that. I can see that. You can ask that question looking from the eyes of people outside into Russia, especially knowing, having lived through the Cold War and things like that. It's easy to ask that question, but, flip it around and go to the other side. And of course they do. They have to. It's just human nature.
Sure.
Wow. That's
now.
Wow.
Well, that was the basis of his song. That was his basis of his song. And he now, when he does that song, he does a lead-in that explains that, that we love our children is the basis of détente, why we didn't blow each other up.
So he asks almost like a rhetorical question because the assumed answer is yes. I guess.
Well, I think the Russians took it as the assumed answer is no, they don't.
Right, but as a writer of the song, he's kind of asking a rhetorical question, assuming that everybody, assuming the answer is yes.
The feedback I was able to give him from Russia made him assess the fact there's a possibility of miscommunication.
Wow.
And he didn't want that to go on. Wow. So I was always very touched by that. Because so many people in the biz, do anything to get press.
Sure.
And I worked in that area for a while too. But the fact that he recognized an error, if you will, in quotes, and out of his own pocket re-recorded it, and re-released it, recut it, remastered it, whatever. I always respected that a lot.
For sure, man. That says a whole lot about somebody.
I got a question, Ken.
Yeah.
You were doing a lot of traveling to Russia and stuff, but the military was, how did you get around with all the knowledge that you had in developing the things that you were developing, where they were like looking in on Russian television? How were you allowed to go to
special concessions made?
Yeah, like how were you allowed to go there? And
well, your question sounds a lot like somebody. Jackson Browne once went to Russia, and one of the first interviews he had was, "How did you get out?" And he said, "I took a bus." There was nothing special at all.
Wow.
Because, I would think that if the military was looking at you, they would be like, well, we don't want the guy going over there, because if the Russians knew, they would, it was a dicey time.
Well, I was just a satellite engineer, I didn't really have any secrets. The thing that I invented to get Russian television here was a clone or a replica of what the Russians themselves were doing to get television to the northern third of their country, because they're too far north for stationary satellite. So as you go further north, the look angle from the satellite gets lower and lower and lower.
Right.
And eventually you're looking through the earth. That don't fly very good.
Yeah.
So Russia had a particular problem. We were able to put up geosynchronous satellites around 1971 or so. And the Russians weren't able to do it until much, much later. They didn't have the booster capability. But even if they had, it wouldn't have served the purpose of uniting the friendly peoples of all their 15 republics, because much of their peoples were way north of the North Pole, up near the North Pole, and a geosynchronous satellite is below the ground. So they came up with a really brilliant orbit. It's an inclined orbit. It goes like 63 degrees inclined to the north. It's going northeast, kind of. And as it goes north, it's going higher and higher and higher and higher. So it gets over Canada. When it gets over a place called Mansell Island in Hudson's Bay, it's like 25,000 miles over Canada. And when it goes southbound on the other side of the Earth, it goes to within 100 miles of the South Pole. So it's really inclined. It's going more up and down than it is going north and south, if you will.
This is crazy.
So to get their TV, I had to take an Apple II and make it track that thing. There were actually 4 of them, and one came up to Buffalo, New York. It is going northbound on the west side of the Mississippi. It would turn on over Duluth, Minnesota, and then it would go up to Mansell Island and appear to make a loop come southbound. That's an illusion. It's not really making a loop, but that's the Earth rotating and so forth. Mm-hmm. And it would come southbound over Buffalo, New York, approximately. When it got southbound over Buffalo, a second satellite was going northbound over Duluth that took over. So they had 4 satellites that did that. And for the 6 hours that a particular satellite was over Canada, well, I called it quasi-stationary. It wasn't going across the sky. It was just going a little bit up, a little bit to the right, a little bit up, a little bit to the right. So I was able to get an Apple II to track it. And when it got down to where the satellite was over Buffalo, my antenna would swing over to Duluth. And you'd have continuous service from the 4 satellites, a constellation of 4.
Wow.
So they came up with like some really neat stuff to compensate for their lack of, in that case, booster capability, and also their lack of favorable geography.
Geography, yeah.
Not geography.
Geography.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And well, I was perfecting that system like I perfect any of the other things that I come up with, and I was at the first. It was the fall of 1985. The first class ever held called Russian through Soviet Television. It was a class for graduate students at Columbia, and they were able to measure 300% increase in spoken language comprehension from their students compared to students who just had books and professors.
Wow.
So it was really great. You thought it would catch on like wildfire to other universities, but universities don't work that way. Well, I'm up in the front of the room where all my equipment was, while behind my back is to the class. The class was the first class in Russian through Soviet television. And I, turned around, and, there was this girl. Woo! And her, you know the deal. Her eyes burned a hole in the back of my head. Purely unintentional, I'm sure. And so I'm not shy, so I made a piece of paper, and they're studying Russian. They're going for masters and PhDs and stuff in Sovietology, Kremlinology. We're getting away from AC/DC, are we? I'm sorry. And I made a piece of paper, and I held it up over my head saying, "Have name?" I'm leaving out the article. You have a name? No. Have name? And she starts squirming in her chair because I had holes in my pants. I didn't wear socks. I didn't look like Columbia graduate material, And after like 5 or 6 times, I held it up, and she squirmed. And finally, I get a piece of paper with her name. And now I'm on a roll, so I made another sign and said, "Have fun." Well, no joy. I didn't get the phone number.
Aww.
But we did catch up together around my birthday in October. And we wound up being together for a couple of years. And what happened that December, she was leading a trip it's like 2 days in Prague, 2 days in Kiev, 2 days in Moscow, 2 days in St. Petersburg, or Leningrad at the time. So I signed up to the trip. I signed up for the trip. She could have been going to Easter Island. I would have signed up for the trip. It had nothing to do with my being on CNN as an expert in the Soviet Union. I was on CNN a couple of times. Says, "What's next in the Soviet Union, Ken?" "I don't even know how to spell USSR. Why are you asking me? I just do Windows." Okay.
Oh my God.
Classic. But anyway, that's what got me to Russia. And once I got over there, I met some like awesome people, who were able to make do homebrew style. They couldn't go to the Radio Shack on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, neither can we. Boy, I used to abuse Radio Shack so much, because I came from an era where you used to buy one resistor from a big barrel, and Radio Shack came along, they shrink wrapped 5 of them. I only want one.
Right.
and then there was none. That's where we're at now.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so I met some incredible people, and I started some companies that were like liaisons between Soviet stuff and American stuff. Like, mostly it was media, and nobody wanted to put money into the ground over there in the Soviet Union, and nobody was too sure what's going on. So the first wave of commerce, if you will, was media voyeurism. Like, I came up with an idea of taking a Life magazine journalist and put him into Red Army boot camp for a month. And conversely, take a journalist from a Russian magazine, put him into U.S. Army base camp, U.S. Marine base camp. I guess it was Paris Island or wherever it was.
Yeah.
So we did that. It was really exciting at that time. It's before the Joint Chiefs were trading wives, I guess.
Wow.
After my 15th or 25th trip to Russia, my rock and roll roots. I keep trying to get out of rock and roll. I mean, I don't even know. I don't know. Kanye West, I don't even know who she is.
Exactly.
I think I stopped listening quite a while ago, but throughout my life, I get out of rock and roll, and then 7 years, somehow it sucks me. I can't get rid of it, and it can't get rid of me.
Well, good. It's meant to be that.
So I've been out of rock and roll forever, and now Phil Olivieri comes along, and boom, here I am again. So I had this idea of a little bit of a pun in English. I want to see what happens when we take the best of them and the best of us and see what happens when we play together. And I went around to some official agencies to find out who are the best musicians in your country, and they would give me lists of all these official musicians. And basically, I learned later, official musicians were guys who, sing for the state,
mm-hmm.
and are not really what we would call impromptu musicians. They do their job, and they get a nice apartment, and, the truth is forever gone. So I realized when I listened to some of these artists who were official musicians that to do this project, bring them over and recording in the States would set U.S.-Soviet relations back 20 years. So I went out on the streets and started asking kids, who's the best, mm-hmm. And almost unanimously, everybody would say, Grebenshikov. Grebenshikov. Or as David Letterman later said when he interviewed Grebenshikov, he had the CBS biography where they spelled the name phonetically. And how do you say your name, Boris? Grab and jack off? No, okay. Letterman, I love you. In any case, there was a guy named Boris Grebenshikov who has been described as kind of funky, but you described as the John Lennon come Bob Dylan of Russia, and he remains still like the poet laureate of a generation or a few generations. He's right. He's really amazing.
Wow.
So I met him, and in just a couple of minutes, I understand he's the one. And we wound up doing we brought him over to the States, which was like really unbelievable at the time. Nobody in Russia thought he would ever be allowed to leave the country because he was being harassed by KGB and stuff, and he wasn't an official musician. But we got him out, and we did a week in New York, and I took him around to meet almost everybody in New York. And we did a week in Los Angeles where we repeated that. And we made an album for Columbia. Unfortunately, on the trip to the States, on the long 12-hour or 15-hour plane ride, somebody had given Boris a cassette of Eurythmics, which he listened to like 10 times on the flight.
Oh, my God.
Got off the plane thinking Annie Lennox, if God is a woman, any question, that's her voice.
Sweet dreams.
Sweet dreams are made of cheese. Yeah,
that's right.
That's one of my email addresses, by the way. It's called Take My Brain Away at somethingorother.com, somethingorother.com. And it's like we did this album because Eurythmics touched Boris so deeply. He decided that Dave Stewart would be the guy he wants to produce him.
Wow.
And I was going, oh, please, no. Because, I knew Dave as a signature producer where everything he touches turns into Dave Stewart, which is not bad, but it didn't reflect Boris, who was very natural, no synthesizers and no co-ed choirs and things like this. So I was trying to pitch Michael Stipe, but, that I couldn't break through his love of Annie and Eurythmics. So Dave produced the album, and it was a very nice album. Boris wrote everything in English. His English is better than mine. He even speaks Old English, old with an E. He's really amazing.
Is it available somewhere?
The album came out in 1989 on Columbia. It's called Radio Silence. And what happened was he was on the Letterman show. It was a big press thing. Wherever he went, he was greeted by every reporter in town asking him about Gorbachev and, all this kind of stuff. And Boris just he didn't want to talk politics,
Probably a good thing if he expected to go back home.
American journalists saw him as a representative of everything Soviet, which is not what he was. In any case, he was on Letterman. And this was probably it was a magic carpet. Everything was a magic carpet on this project until he did Letterman. And aside from the pronunciation of his name, Letterman held up the CBS biography and said, Boris, I have the biography from CBS here, and it says that you're the biggest musician in the Soviet Union, yet you've never made a dime with your music. You might have heard, I'm doing Letterman now, you might have heard that here in the West, rock musicians such as yourself amass great fortunes. What do you think? And Boris makes a duck face. And he goes, I think that maybe explains why American music is so uninteresting. Oh, man, the audience broke into 50-50. Half of them screaming, yeah. Half screaming, go home, you son of a commie bat. And unfortunately, in that half were all the CBS promotion men.
Oh, wow.
Let's say the spotlight support on the album was sort of...
I was going to say, it's not on iTunes.
Somebody turned the lights out on that one real quick. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
What a story.
Yeah, it's
not on iTunes. I never looked for it, actually.
I just did.
Did you?
Yeah. on YouTube.
I just look for it on iTunes and no radio silence.
Wow.
Okay, go look on YouTube. And also Michael Apted, the guy who did Girls in the Mist and Coal Miner's Daughter and all that stuff. He's an Academy Award-winning director. Did a movie of Boris Sub me doing this project. It was like a 2-year film project going from Moscow to London to St. Petersburg to L.A. to New York. And that film, that's on YouTube.
Wow.
Big money there. Big money. That film is called The Long Way Home. Although when we were making it, we called it The Wrong Way Home. The untouched Boris, the untouched pure Boris from the backwater of Leningrad meets the American music machine. Oh, it was painful sometimes.
Oh my God!
We gotta have him back on. There's so much in there. I mean, I don't even know how we get where.
I keep thinking, is there anything else he hasn't done? But no, he's done that too.
Every time
he's done that too.
First off, the one part that just is,
we got to wrap this soon.
I know that we could be here all night, right? But the part that gets me is that your girlfriend was the first female tour manager, correct? Right?
Lynn Volkman.
Okay, and we'll have to try to get a hold of her one day.
By the way, she came back and she was Whitney Houston's right hand for 10 years after all of that.
Wow.
Quite a while after all that.
These aren't little hitters. These are major players in the music scene.
The business.
This is your girlfriend. You end up seeing them, the Stones do a show where the wireless sucks. You decide, well, I'm going to fix that. So you fix that. You literally change the face of rock and roll for some iconic albums. I mean, that, it is unbelievable. It's so crazy.
Sort of happens. It just sort of happens.
Well, yeah.
You just try to do good work. And
I mean, doesn't it happen to everybody?
Well, last Tuesday.
Well, listen, when I was born in New York, is a tremendous advantage over being anywhere else and probably any other age. Because it was all, in the late 60s, it was all, Beatles and rock and roll and Woodstock and Man on the Moon and Vietnam and birth control. That was good, too. Everything was happening in one tiny little compressed space of time. And it was all happening on Broadway between like 57th Street and 48th Street.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the birthright, if you will, meant it was easy to connect with the greatest producers, engineers, musicians. We were all eating at the same coffee shop or hot dog stand.
Unreal, man.
Wow.
We had some good parties.
We've got to
charm time indeed.
We've got to sit down with Ken, and just these stories could go on.
Next time we're up in New York.
Yeah, we gotta.
We'll sit down and have coffee.
Yeah, we have to have coffee. Just roll tape.
That would be a pleasure. I mean, once I start going with this kind of stuff, my head goes into reliving it, and I could keep going.
Wow, I'm glad you were able to relive a little bit of it with us.
Thank you, man. I mean, just for your contribution.
Absolutely.
I mean, some of the coolest damn albums were made because of your little device that you wanted to just have them have a better signal when they were playing live.
Totally.
Well, thank you. Well, I just want to say about Phil, I know you got to go, but about Phil, I got a message from him the way we met. Is I got this 3-page long email. And, he says that I didn't answer it for like a month or something, but he had been doing his research and he came up with the fact the only thing in Angus Young's equipment chain that he didn't have was this Schaffer Vega thing.
Yeah.
Everything else he had exactly what Angus had, and he didn't hear the same sound, and it must be this Schaffer Vega thing. And someone pointed out that, that's why he used it in the studio. Well, he was afraid, intimidated, I guess you would say. He was afraid to contact me, Mr. Schaffer would never take my, would never read my email, which is like completely dunce cap city, But it's adorable. It's really adorable. I mean, Phil comes from, I think he was not raised or brought up. I think he was reared. He comes from a very a very well-mannered European family, you know.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And, you know, it's not like the Bronx. We were raised.
Right.
He was weird.
He was raised good.
Yeah.
But so finally it's the only thing I ever got. He actually joined LinkedIn to get a message to me.
Holy
Wow.
crap.
I have never met anybody who joined LinkedIn for any reason. No, he was a paid subscriber because I guess you had to pay to get the message to me. And
wow.
Well, obviously you're on it. Or not.
And I'm very easy to find, by the way. I'm very easy to find. So anyway, he wrote me this incredible letter. And one thing that was evident was this is a guy who has devoted his whole freaking life to this noble quest of, as crazy as it sounds, figuring out the secret to Angus Young's guitar sound on Black and Black.
Yeah.
Now, how do you devote your life to a thing like that? You know, there comes the isolated obsessive thing. Thank you, Sting.
Sure.
So I read the letter. I was very, very touched. And, you know, I did have 2 units left, and they were in the closet for like 20 years. Wow. You know, there were souvenirs for my son who just is not interested at all.
Wow.
So I,
Does he know who his
sent
dad
them
is?
to Bill because I figured he'd give it, if anybody could give it a great home, it would be he. The only parallel to it is that I once got a 3-page telex before there were phone lines and internet. Between the Soviet Union and the United States. There used to be only 24 simultaneous phone connections between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Like there's 24,000 to London, you know, kind of thing.
Sure.
So the communications with Russia you had to do by telex. Phone calls you had to book ahead for a week or two, and you can't hear anything. You go, speak up. You know, anyway. I got a 3-page letter from a woman named Galina Semyonova. She was the corresponding secretary of the Moscow Flora y Fauna Dog Club. And the 3 pages clearly were written by somebody who didn't speak English whatsoever, but picked every word out of a dictionary.
Oh, my.
And she actually was she explained that the most popular dogs in the Soviet Union were American Cocker Spaniels, and that she's with the dog club, and the problem is that they're all inbred like 20 generations.
Jesus.
And could I possibly bring a couple of nice Cocker Spaniels over?
Wow.
Well, I thought that was a bit much. But I went to the dog store before my next trip, and I bought some bones and a leash and some doggy toys and magazines. And I met her. I met her for breakfast at my hotel. And, you know, we were able to converse. I'm able to do well in Russian, even though I don't speak very much Russian. If you want to understand somebody, you kind of do, you know. But in any case, I had just gotten off a long, long flight. It was a connecting flight, so it might have been 18 hours in airplane seats. And I got up from breakfast, and crink in my back. Oh, I couldn't stand up. And she looks at me, and she goes, Какой проблем? And I point to my back, and I made a sign like an airplane. I'm flapping my hands now. And then she pulls out her business card. It said, Galina Semyonova, Chief Masseuse, Kremlin.
Nice.
Well, long story. Well, we went up to my room, and in 15 minutes, I was Fred Astaire.
Whoa!
And,
wow!
She eventually came to the States. You know, I invited her. Everybody wanted to come visit for 2 weeks. I invited her for 2 weeks. That was about 20 years ago. She's still here, and New York Magazine says she's the best masseuse in New York for like 10 years running.
Oh my God!
Holy crap!
He not only imports Russian TV to this country, he imports the best Russian masseuse into this country.
I could send you a couple of. Done. Okay, I could send you a couple of clipping links of stuff that's particularly funny if you like.
Yeah,
Always,
I mean, we'll
throw up the links on those.
Without a doubt, Ken, you're the smartest guest we've ever had, bar none.
I'm just crawling back in my hole.
I'm like,
I've listened to your show a couple of times. I don't think so.
Oh, believe me. I mean, we are all of our guests we love, but my God, the things that you've done.
Yeah.
Just for the musical side, but then there's this whole other side. It's just amazing, man.
It's fantastic.
It's a lifetime of stuff. It's just crazy.
That's what it is. It is a lifetime of stuff.
It's still going.
Good.
It's still
that's
going.
good, man. Good. Wow.
You know, I mean, I don't want Phil to keep calling me Zio. It means uncle in Italian. I mean, for the first 2 years, he would call me Mr. Schaffer, which nobody ever called me anyway, but he would always address me as Mr. Schaffer. And so only in the last couple of years, he's been familiar, like, Kenny? Yeah. But anyway, no, I mean,
glad.
like, stuff just happens. I mean, that's my philosophy of life is if you just, well, you know what I'm going to say.
Sure.
Yeah, man.
You just do the best you can and keep your nose clean. I don't mean a pun, no.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, I mean, it's almost like we always say, just say yes and see where it leads you.
Look what it's
you know,
done.
he does a little bit differently. It's not say yes. He sees something and says, I'm going to do something with that, or I'm going to do that better, or you know, I'm going to do what's needed. You know,
just stay interested.
Yeah.
Stay interested. Don't get so defined in your. Don't define yourself so much that you're not interested in changing. You know.
Sure.
You know, if you look back at some of the things you're into now, hey, I got to keep you one more minute. If anybody ever told me that in 1985, I would start the first of like over 100 trips to Russia. Holy shit. I was brought up as a Cold War kid hiding under my table when I heard a plane above the building, you know? If I heard a plane in the sky, I was told to get it and duck and cover under the table.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I was very anti-Soviet, and I wasn't political or international at all. But in fact, to prove it, in September of 1983, I had this idea to climb Mount Everest. Well, it wasn't exactly climb Mount Everest myself. I sent these Canadians up Mount Everest, and I sold it to ABC, Nightline. Remember Ted Koppel?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
10 nights following the live climb up Mount Everest. They were carrying UHF transmitters that would go UHF down to base camp where I was in a oxygen tent smoking Marlboros. Never mind. And it would go from base camp microwave to Kathmandu. And in Kathmandu, behind the hotel, we'd go over a Pacific Intelsat, come down in Washington State, and go up to an American domestic satellite, come down on 66th Street in New York. And it was a live climb of Mount Everest. And
I remember this.
The last night, dun, 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 dun. Tonight is a special 1-hour edition of Nightline. We've been following the progress of the Canadian Canaverex expedition for the last 9 nights. Tonight we start 200 feet from dun, 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 the summit of the roof of the world. And then goes to commercial. Comes out of the commercial, and there's Ted Koppel with a big jackknife switch. It's a prop, of course. And he goes, now over to expedition leader Bill March, 200 feet from dun, 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 dun. He throws a jackknife switch, and the screen goes, nothing. And, of course, back in New York, they went to tape. They went off in half an hour. They all got red cheeks. Up at base camp, I don't know if you know that television producers are the most paranoid people. Maybe advertising executives are, but television producers always think they're going to get fired. So when the signal stopped coming, I jumped out of my tent and I sort of goofing. I didn't, you got to pick when you be goofy, I come out of my tent and scream, "Oh shit! I forgot to change the batteries." Which at first was like a joke because the climbers are up at 29,000 feet. We're here at 17,000 feet. I wasn't supposed to change the batteries, but the Evereadys froze up.
Wow.
Whoa.
These guys are running around seeing their lives, flash before their eyes. They're going to get fired when they get back to New York. So the next morning, we're supposed to leave Kathmandu. The charter has gone. Nobody woke me up. I am now stuck in Kathmandu with no ticket home.
Oh, my God.
And not a lot of money. What little money I had, I blew in casino Kathmandu blackjack. Oh, now I'm broke. I had to spend like 2 or 3 weeks going around to people I'd meet and go, come on, give me 50, bucks, give me 100, to buy a ticket home. And finally, after a couple of weeks, I collected enough money to get the cheapest ticket home. Hang on one sec.
It's home calling. Did you get enough money?
It's Kathmandu.
Right.
So I got enough money to get the cheapest ticket home. And it was Kathmandu, New Delhi, Moscow, New York. 1983, September. I wouldn't even go to Moscow to change planes in a place like this. I kind of biased against. I had to stay in Kathmandu for another 2 weeks to get enough money to buy the next ticket, which was Kathmandu, New Delhi, London, New York.
Wow.
So even to get home, which I desperately wanted to get home, I would not go to Moscow. Now, if anybody told me then that starting in 2 years, young Ken,
you'd be taking 100 trips.
100 times.
That is so funny.
Huh?
Wow.
You know, that reminds me, my favorite line in English is Kurt Vonnegut. You know that in the beginning of a book you have a one-liner? I forget what you call it, not a dedication, but a clever one-liner on a whole page. And in Kurt Vonnegut's, I forget which book it was, is my favorite one-liner in English is, strange travel instructions are dancing lessons from God.
That pretty much sums up an incredible life.
We can't end on a better note.
No, wow.
Nick, Jeff, anytime you want to give me a yell back on or off the air, welcome. And if you come to New York, we play.
Awesome.
Absolutely, man.
Ken, that sounds fantastic, man. Go. I assume that was your guests letting you know they're arriving. So go. And, you know.
Just stay with me. Let me take a look and see what comes through the door. Hang on.
First-hand experience.
It doesn't get any better than this.
Wow. You know, we just leave the line open.
Oh,
we just leave the line open.
We're gonna do it.
That's it.
That's it.
You know, we'll just come back once a week and see what's being recorded.
Timing. Yeah, the girls are out by the elevator, not knowing which way to go. There's only 2 doors you could go to. Okay. Come in. Oh, a lot of luggage. Okay. So,
well, you know, like Yogi Berra said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it.
That's a good one. I got to write that one down.
There you go, man.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fun. I hope we didn't depart from music too far, but I guess we did. I don't know.
You know, we might have, but so what?
Ken, it's your story, man. That's what it was all about.
It's your journey, man. We just bring it to people.
Absolutely.
So, thank you so much, my friend. Go entertain your guest and have a great evening, a great rest of the week, and hopefully we'll see you in person someday, my friend.
I hope that's soon. And let me know when this thing is edited up and running, okay?
Yes,
Will
sir.
Do, man. Thank you so much.
All right, man.
Awesome. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. And there you have the whole story and nothing but the story.
I don't think,
you know what? I can't even say whole story.
I was going to say, I don't think we have the whole story. I think that story is like, it would be episodes.
Well, you couldn't possibly do anything. Oh, yes, you could.
Dude, I mean... Here I'm thinking this guy was like some double E that maybe went to, worked in a place like a Westinghouse or General Electric.
Right.
Had this idea, made this thing, and it was used by a couple people.
No.
Not at all. It couldn't be. That is mind-boggling.
Yeah. And I'm just going to say this right now because... this has been a very long interview.
Yes.
And what our guests just heard, because I'm doing this now before Mick edits, I don't know if you've heard the whole thing or not. I really don't know.
I'll try to keep as much as I can.
But, man, I think a Grateful Dead line is in order here. What a long, strange trip it's been. That's all I got, man.
I would say.
That's all I got.
You know what? And God bless Phil Oliveri for making this happen, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, God. It's just... Phew.
I think we had...
There's like 5 books in there.
I think we had a much easier time with Ken than Phil did for the past 2 years of communicating with him.
At 1,000%.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We got nothing else.
Thank you both.
Yes. Thank
you
so much. So until next time, my friend.
You think there's a next time after this?
I'm Mick Marcelino.
And I'm still the amazed Jeff Cooper.
And we are always saying...
Onward.
Be sure and follow the show on Twitter @AmpsandAxis. Also, make sure you like the show on Facebook. For news, comments, and everything else, visit the webpage ampsandaxiscast.com. Thanks for listening.